So the Knight is receiving some changes on the upcoming 9.1.0 PTB. The Call to Arms add-on is being made partially base kit. The add-on itself is being nerfed, and the base kit in the areas the add-on affects is being buffed. Those areas are the patrol path maximum distance. It's going to 38 meters maximum, up from 32, whereas the Call to Arms is now only going to add 4 meters of maximum length, down from 10. And the speed at which the patrol path orb moves is being increased to 15 meters per second, up from 13.8. And the Call to Arms movement speed buff is being reduced to 7%, down from 16. I haven't done the math. I don't know if that's a perfect one-to-one exchange where Call to Arms will be completely the same as it was before, or rather using Call to Arms will be the same as it was before, and then it's just the base kit is better, but I'm pretty sure that's more or less where the Knight will be in that respect. In exchange, the ability to actually get hits with the guards is being gutted, more or less. Now, some people are perhaps overreacting to these changes. They're acting like the Knight is going to be bottom 5. That's not accurate. Now, the Clown will be if his changes go through. The Knight will be mostly fine, but only in the respect that he's fine now, which you could argue he isn't. In effect, the Carnifex is actually getting buffed. His banner will now take 8 seconds to spawn in, up from 5, but the Assassin's banner will now take 4 seconds to spawn in, down from 5, and the Jailer will also take 4 seconds, down from 10. The Assassin, while this is obviously a nerf, is not going to be affected as much as people think. 1 second is not going to make a huge difference, but it will make a difference. There are going to be times where the Assassin might have gotten a hit because the Survivor just maybe couldn't linger around the banner long enough for the Assassin to not get a hit before the banner spawns in. Or, you know, maybe the Survivor will just barely make it back to the banner now. It is definitely a nerf, but it's not a huge nerf to the Assassin. The Jailer, however, that is a massive nerf, because the Jailer doesn't get hits as often as the Assassin does, certainly more than the Carnifex, but not often. Now he will never get hits. The Jailer moves at the same speed as the Carnifex, which I believe is 102.5% speed, slightly slower than Burger King Myers. But the benefit of the Jailer is how long his banner takes to spawn in, which requires you to essentially waste time. He is a guaranteed time waster if he detects you. Bare minimum, he's wasting 10 seconds of your time instead of 5 like the other two. Optimistically, he's probably going to waste the full 24 seconds if he manages to zone you away from the banner, which obviously, being a bot, he will never do intentionally. But now that's not going to happen. Now he's moving at the same speed as he always does, which is quite slow. And now you're going to be able to get the banner in 4 seconds instead of 10, which makes the Jailer just as bad as he used to be, if not worse. The Carnifex buff is a buff, but it is a meaningless buff. The Carnifex doesn't fail to get hits because his banner spawns in 5 seconds. He fails to get hits because his hunt duration is the same as the Assassin, 12 seconds, base kit, but without the speed of the Assassin. He moves at the same speed as the Jailer, but with the chase duration of the Assassin. It doesn't matter. He could not have a banner, and he's still never going to hit you unless you completely zone yourself, or are half asleep, or maybe you drop your controller. Maybe if you're in a dead zone, he gets a hit. Maybe. but even then I would hesitate to say that if you just start running immediately upon getting detected, that he ever gets a hit. He's not like the assassin, who moves as fast as some killers. He's not like the jailer, who can waste a lot of time and potentially simply outlast your ability to loop him if you're in an area with very few windows. So the Carnifex buff isn't even really a buff, it's nothing. You could completely get rid of that banner, like I said, completely get rid of the banner for the Carnifex, and he is never going to, it's not going to change anything. He's never going to hit you. And I'm just adding this in later after having recorded the original audio, which I did all in one take. But this is fine. It's fine that the Carnifex isn't good for chase. He has his job. The other two will do theirs. He's good for breaking pallets. He's good for getting a quick smack on a generator so that you don't have to waste time doing that in the middle of a chase, for example. Although if you want to interrupt a generator and prevent it from being completed right as it's about to be done, the assassin and the jailer are actually better for that because they prevent it from being worked on for 5 seconds while they're kicking it. Anyway, this is fine. The Carnifex doesn't need to be great at chase. He like I said, he is good for breaking pallets and kicking generators, and if the other two guards are on cooldown, you still have him as a zoning option. Maybe he's not going to get a hit, but he's at least going to force them to waste time. The Knight is an unpopular killer, both in terms of pick rate and in terms of survivor opinion. So I can see why they don't want to just straight up buff him the way they are pretty much doing with Pyramid Head, the way they are pretty much doing with Pig, although Pig sees her fair share of complaints as well. And not that Pyramid Head isn't getting some small base kit nerfs to offset how much more powerful he's going to be, but I digress. The Knight is more in the boat of the Clown in this PTB, where he's almost more nerfed than he is buffed. Certainly the Clown is, but that's a separate topic. And AriNad has already made much more comprehensive analytical videos than I ever could about this change. But as somebody who's been playing the Knight since he released, I do have some opinions on the killer. He's not my main. He is my second most played killer nowadays. I actually main Unknown, but Knight has always been one of my top picks. I actually started playing the game because I heard they were adding a For Honor killer, which, of course, ended up not being the case. But I still ended up liking the Knight, both visually and from a gameplay perspective, even though he was very weak when he first released. And he's gotten better over time, especially when they added Lara Croft and they gave the Knight a partial rework, which was huge for the killer. It made him a much stronger killer. It brought him from like a lower tier to more of a mid tier. And it made him just feel better to play in general. Because before, you almost didn't want to use the Carnifex to kick a gen, for example, because, oh, I might need him later on for a long chase, or I might need him to break a pallet. And you didn't want to use the Assassin for similar purposes. You didn't want to use the Assassin to break pallets. You didn't want to use the Assassin to kick gens, because you might need him later. And if you use the Assassin, well, then you have the Jailer, who back then was completely useless because he was slower at breaking than the Carnifex, and he did not have the benefit of having the longest chase back then, like he does now. That honor belonged to the Carnifex as well. The only thing the Jailer had going for him was a larger detection radius, which he still has, and the detriment of having a longer patrol duration, which, because you could not remotely cancel patrols, was only ever a hindrance. And when they gave the Knight his partial rework, I was very happy with that, and then they walked it back, and then I actually was so demotivated from that that I actually dropped the game for a little while until Dracula came out. And then shortly after that, they brought some of those changes forward, and the Knight felt great to play still. Just like he did on the Lara Croft PTB. Now, I'm not going to advocate for just exclusively buffing the Knight. He has some issues that make him very frustrating to play against. But I want to start with buffs that I would give him. I'm not just criticizing behaviors, numerous mistakes. I am also going to provide suggestions for them to implement. Not that they're going to see this video, and even if they do, not that they're going to listen to it, but these would probably be, at least in my opinion, the best things to change for the Knight. Now, the biggest pain of playing the killer that any Knight player can attest to is the fact that if you are near any wall or environmental collision in general, especially dropped pallets, you cannot use your power. I don't know the exact numerical distance that you have to be from any collision to actually use your power, but it feels like you have to be a full day's journey away from a wall to summon a guard. I don't think this was implemented to be an intentional hindrance to the Knight, but I do think, obviously, it was implemented intentionally. And I think the reason they did that is so that when the orb spawns in, obviously it's offset a little from the Knight. I assume it was done so that when the orb spawns in, that it doesn't get stuck in any collision, because the orb has collision with the environment. That's the most likely case, and I don't fault them for that, but I think a better solution would be to either remove collision from the orb for the first several meters of the patrol path, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever, or even completely remove collision from the orb entirely. Now, some people might be hesitant to accept a change like that because, well, now the Knight can snipe you through walls if he is on the other side of a wall, such as like on the game, or if he's at a tile. I don't think this would be a huge buff, but maybe that would be too much. Maybe I'm not imagining just what that could be used for, but I would suggest at the very least removing collision from the first few meters of the patrol path. That way you can, for example, immediately break a dropped pallet with your Carnifex without having to take a few steps back. That is the most frustrating aspect of playing as the Knight. And already that would be huge for quality of life. I don't think it would take him up on the tier list a whole lot. And I don't even think it would cause further increase in complaints from survivors, if that were the case. That one is, I think, the biggest change that Knight needs. Beyond that, the fact that the banner grants endurance for, I believe, 5 seconds, and it essentially gives you a sprint burst upon being grabbed, that is, in my opinion, insane. And the thing is, a lot of the time, if the Knight is sniping with his guard, neither of those are going to be useful anyway. You don't need the endurance if the Knight is nowhere near you. You don't need the sprint burst if the Knight is nowhere near you. And if the Knight is nearby, he could already just hit you himself before you can even reach the banner, or cancel the hunt by summoning another guard and then immediately canceling that. But just the fact that that option is available, where you could just tank a hit that you might not have even deserved to tank. You grab a banner and you're untouchable for a few seconds, and you make free distance. It's a little much. I would at least remove the endurance, if not the haste as well. But On the other hand, the Knight is very frustrating for survivors. He really only doesn't see more complaints because he was immediately followed by the worst addition to the game in its 9 years of being out. And because he is unpopular to play as, probably owing to the fact that he's a bit clunky and the fact that he's not particularly powerful. And survivors, of course, have it rough right now with all the Kanekis going around, with Springtrap going around. And I'd rather not make Knight contribute to that frustration further. I play a bit of Survivor myself. I lean more towards Killer, but I play Survivor with my friends. Every once in a while I'll play Survivor on my own and end up dying very quickly because my solo queue teammates don't do generators, but I digress. But there is definitely a frustration factor going against the Knight. It's been that way since he came out. Even when people know the counterplay, some people just, perhaps rightfully, consider him unfun to play against. And so I would like to suggest some things to alleviate that frustration. I think, first of all, the detection radius could be perhaps reduced for the first few seconds, or maybe just the first second that the guard is out. And I'll elaborate a little bit on that in a bit. But I think also the clarity of the counterplay could be worked on a little. They made a bug base kit into a base kit form of counterplay with the window bumping, and that I didn't love, but I think it can be fine if the Knight gets some additional buffs. So that can be kept. I think perhaps the guards should reward more precision, though. I think perhaps the initial placement of a guard could have a reduced detection radius, and then in exchange, the guard gets maybe a flat 5% movement speed bonus. Not a 5% increase of their actual movement speed, but a flat 5%. That would put the assassin at 115 or 4.6 meters per second, average killer movement speed. And the Carnifex and the Jailer, I believe, at 107.5, which would be 4.3 meters per second. Slightly slower than killers such as the Hag or the Huntress. Which, obviously, this could be seen as another buff to the Knight, but that bonus could disappear maybe like 1 second after the guard is spawned, so it only rewards very precise placement. I would also perhaps remove the haste that the Knight gets from placing a guard. It doesn't help him that much when you are trying to play very precise, but it can be kind of frustrating to go against, I imagine, because you're used to a killer moving at 115, and maybe you don't make a window that you think you should make, or you greed a pallet that you needed to not greed because he's moving 5% faster. And I don't think it's necessary. I don't think, like some people do, that the Knight should be able to see survivors while placing a guard. One, you can still detect people by listening. And two, I think it's necessary for a form of skill expression to show that the Knight player has achieved some mastery of the killer if he's still able to track you while placing the guard and not being able to see you or see your scratch marks or see your pools of blood. He's purely only able to hear you and maybe see like the grass moving if you're running through it. That's fine. I don't think the Knight needs a buff in that aspect. Obviously, there will always be people who just simply cannot do the counterplay. And I think, unfortunately, the way Dead by Daylight is designed as a game, That's just something that has to be accepted. You know, there will always be people who don't know how to look at the ground to avoid trappers' traps. There will always be people who, for whatever reason, don't know how to crouch walk to avoid hags' traps. There will always be people who don't know how to look at unknown, or lock dredges lockers, or use EMPs against singularity, or place turrets against xenomorph. There will always be people who don't know the counterplay to a killer. And while I think frustrations on both sides should be addressed for at least the health of the game, I don't think you should cater to people who just simply aren't meant to win. But ultimately, I think the Knight at his core will always be a little frustrating to go against. That's just something that has to be accepted. But the idea is to at least alleviate some frustration and make the killer have a higher skill ceiling. And as you can tell, this is an unscripted video. It's just kind of my random thoughts on both the Knight as a killer and also on the PTB. And what they could do to maybe make the Knight more fun for both sides. Obviously, the Knight is always going to have his reputation, but he shouldn't have his guards gutted just because he's getting a small quality of life buff. I would also even potentially suggest, this is going more into the realm of experimental changes that maybe they could test on a PTB. Maybe make it not even possible for the hunted survivor to grab the banner. Make it maybe something that a teammate has to do. That is something that could actually very much backfire. Obviously, the